14 billion years ago, something emerged from nothing. Not from empty space, from nothing. No space, no time, no matter, no energy, no laws, nothing. And then in a fraction of a second, smaller than any number you can write, there was everything. All the energy that would ever exist, all the matter that would ever form, all the space that would ever expand, all the time that would ever pass, everything, from nothing, in an instant. Physics calls this the Big Bang. The Quran calls it kun fayakun, be and it is. The Torah calls it Bereshit bara Elohim. In the beginning, God created. The Rig Veda describes a cosmic golden egg, Hiranyagarbha, that contained all of creation before it burst open. The Buddhist Agana Sutta describes the universe cycling through expansion and contraction across unimaginable timescales. Every civilization that ever looked at the sky and asked, "How did this start?" arrived at the same structure. Something came from nothing, instantly, completely, absolutely. And the question of whether that something was a quantum fluctuation in a metastable vacuum field or the deliberate act of a conscious creator is the question that has defined the relationship between science and religion for 4 centuries. I am going to do something unusual in this series. I am going to be honest. Not honest in the way that means I will tell you what I believe. Honest in the way that means I will not pretend to have an answer, when the honest truth is that nobody does. Not the physicists, not the theologians, not the philosophers, not the atheists, not the believers. Nobody has resolved this question, and anyone who tells you they have is either lying or has not understood the question deeply enough to recognize how hard it is. This series is not an argument for God. This series is not an argument against God. This series is an examination of the actual relationship between scientific knowledge and religious claims, where they genuinely conflict, where they unexpectedly converge, where they ask different questions and get confused for asking the same question, and where the deepest discoveries of modern physics have made the relationship far more complicated than either side wants to admit. I have no team in this fight. I will present the strongest version of every argument, the strongest scientific objections to religious claims, and the strongest scientific discoveries that align with religious claims, and I will let you decide. Multiple times throughout this series I will stop and ask you directly what you think, because this is not a question that should be answered by a video. This is a question that should be answered by you after hearing the best evidence from both sides. Let us start where most people think the story starts, with conflict. In 1633, Galileo Galilei was brought before the Roman Inquisition in Rome. He was 69 years old, frail, nearly blind in one eye, one of the most famous scientists in Europe, the inventor of the improved astronomical telescope that magnified objects 20 times, the discoverer of the 4 large moons of Jupiter, proving that not everything orbits the Earth, the discoverer of the phases of Venus, proving that Venus orbits the Sunday, the discoverer of sunspots, proving that the heavens are not perfect and unchanging. He had published a book, Dialogue, concerning the 2 chief world systems that argued the Earth orbits the Sunday, the heliocentric model. Copernicus had proposed it 90 years earlier, but presented it as a mathematical convenience. Galileo presented it as physical truth. The Earth moves, the Sun does not. The Catholic Church said no. The Earth is the center of the universe. Scripture is clear. Joshua 10:12 records Joshua commanding the sun to stand still over Gibeon, implying the sun normally moves across the sky. Psalm 104:5 says, God set the earth on its foundations so it shall never be moved. Ecclesiastes 1:5 says, the sun rises and the sun sets and hastens to the place where it rises. 3 passages, 3 authors, 3 statements that the earth is fixed and the sun moves. The church interpreted these literally. The Theological Commission of 1616 had declared heliocentrism formally heretical. Galileo was warned not to defend it. He defended it anyway. In a book that put the Pope's arguments in the mouth of a character named Simplicio, the simpleton, Galileo was found vehemently suspect of heresy, forced to recant on his knees, to say publicly that the earth does not move. Legend has it he muttered under his breath, "Eppur si muove," and yet it moves. He was placed under house arrest in his villa at Arcetri for the remaining 9 years of his life. He continued working, wrote his greatest scientific work, Two New Sciences, while under house arrest. He died on the 8th of January, 1642, blind, confined, and officially condemned, the most famous martyr of the science versus religion war. But here is the part of the Galileo story that almost nobody mentions. The conflict was not between science and religion. The conflict was between science and a specific interpretation of Scripture. Galileo himself was a devout Catholic. He did not see heliocentrism as contradicting faith. He saw it as contradicting one particular reading of a few passages. In his letter to the Grand Duchess, Christina Galileo argued that the Bible teaches how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. That scripture is not a physics textbook. That God gave humanity 2 books, the book of Scripture and the book of nature, and they cannot contradict each other because they have the same author. If they appear to contradict it, is because we are misreading one of them. Galileo's argument was not science against religion. It was a better interpretation of religion informed by science. The Church eventually agreed. In 1992, 359 years later, Pope John Paul II formally acknowledged that the Church had erred in condemning Galileo. The error was interpretive, not theological. The Bible was never wrong. The interpretation was wrong. In 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species, the Theory of Evolution by Natural Selection, the most dangerous idea in the history of biology. Species were not created individually by God in their current form, as described in Genesis and every other creation narrative. Species evolved from common ancestors through random variation and natural selection over millions of years. Humans were not specially created from clay as the Quran says, or from dust as Genesis says, or from the cosmic egg as Hindu tradition says. Humans evolved from primate ancestors, shared a common ancestor with chimpanzees approximately 6 to 7 million years ago, shared a common ancestor with all mammals approximately 200 million years ago, shared a common ancestor with fish approximately 500 million years ago, shared a common ancestor with all life on Earth approximately 3.8 billion years ago. You and the bacteria in your gut share a great-great-grandmother. The family tree of life is not a collection of independently created species. It is one tree, one single tree, with one root, and every living thing on Earth is a branch. The evidence is overwhelming. The fossil record shows transitions. Tiktaalik, the fish with wrist bones that walked on land 375 million years ago. Archaeopteryx, the dinosaur with feathers 150 million years ago. Australopithecus, the ape that walked upright 4 million years ago. DNA confirms the relationships. Human DNA is 98.7% identical to chimpanzee DNA, 85% identical to mouse DNA, 60% identical to banana DNA. The genetic evidence is so precise that you can calculate the date of common ancestors by counting mutations and knowing the mutation rate. Molecular clocks. They agree with the fossil record. The religious reaction was immediate and fierce. Bishop Samuel Wilberforce debated Thomas Huxley at Oxford in 1860 and reportedly asked whether Huxley was descended from an ape on his grandmother's or grandfather's side. Huxley reportedly replied that he would rather be descended from an ape than from a man who uses his great gifts to obscure the truth. The Tennessee legislature passed the Butler Act in 1925, making it illegal to teach evolution in public schools, leading to the famous Scopes monkey trial. To this day, approximately 40% of Americans believe that God created humans in their present form within the last 10,000 years, according to Gallup polling. The conflict between evolution and creationism is not historical. It is ongoing. It is live. It is happening right now in school boards and legislatures and YouTube comment sections around the world. In 1927, Georges Lemaitre, a Belgian Catholic priest and physicist, proposed that the universe had a beginning, that it began from a primeval atom, an initial singularity that expanded into the cosmos we observe. Most physicists, including Einstein, resisted the idea. Einstein told Lemaitre, "Your calculations are correct, but your physics is abominable." The resistance was partly scientific, the steady-state model was preferred, and partly philosophical. A universe with a beginning sounded too much like creation, too much like Genesis, too much like religion. Fred Hoyle, who advocated the steady-state model, coined the term Big Bang as a dismissal, a joke, an insult. The name stuck, and the evidence accumulated. Hubble's observations of galactic recession, the cosmic microwave background radiation discovered in 1965, the abundance of light elements matching Big Bang nucleosynthesis predictions. The Big Bang won. The universe has a beginning. The priest was right. But notice something strange. When science says the Earth is not the center of the universe, religion resists because it contradicts Scripture. When science says life evolved rather than being specially created, religion resists because it contradicts Scripture. But when science says the universe had a beginning from nothing, the exact claim of Genesis and the Quran and the Vedas, suddenly religion is silent, does not resist, because this time science confirmed the religious claim. The conflict between science and religion is not symmetric. Religion resists science when science contradicts religion. Religion welcomes science when science confirms religion. And science does the same in reverse. Many physicists resisted the Big Bang precisely because it sounded too religious. The resistance was not scientific. It was philosophical. Neither side is purely objective. Both have commitments that distort their reception of evidence. Stop here for a moment. I want you to think about this. Think about your own reaction. If you are religious, did you feel comfortable when I described the Big Bang as matching Genesis? Did you feel uncomfortable when I described evolution? If you are not religious, did you feel the opposite? Comfortable with evolution? Uncomfortable with the Big Bang sounding like creation? Notice the asymmetry. Notice the selectivity. We all do it. We accept the science that confirms our worldview and resist the science that challenges it. This is not a flaw of religion or a flaw of atheism. It is a flaw of being human. And the first step in honestly examining the relationship between science and religion is admitting that we are not neutral. Nobody is neutral. Not me, not you, not the physicist at CERN, not the imam at the mosque. We all have commitments. The best we can do is be honest about them and try to follow the evidence wherever it leads, even when it leads somewhere uncomfortable, especially when it leads somewhere uncomfortable. Now, let me show you something that most science versus religion debates ignore entirely. The religious traditions do not only make claims that science can test. The traditions also describe specific events, miracles, phenomena that violate the known laws of physics. And the question of how to handle these events is where the conversation gets genuinely interesting. Consider the splitting of the Red Sea. Exodus 14. Moses raises his staff, and the waters of the sea divide, allowing the Israelites to cross on dry ground. The waters form walls on their right and left. Then the waters return, drowning the Egyptian army. A miracle, a violation of fluid dynamics, an impossibility according to physics, the kind of event that makes scientists dismiss the entire text as mythology. Or is it? In 2010, researchers Carl Drews and Wei-Ching Han at the National Center for Atmospheric Research published a peer-reviewed study in PLOS One showing that a strong east wind of approximately 100 kilometers per hour blowing for 12 hours over a specific location where an ancient branch of the Nile met a coastal lagoon near the modern city of Port Said could push back the water, creating a land bridge approximately 3 to 4 kilometers long and 5 kilometers wide. That would remain passable for about 4 hours before the wind shifted and the water returned. The study used computational fluid dynamics, the same equations that model ocean currents and design aircraft wings. They ran the simulations on the specific topography of the ancient Nile Delta, and the result was that the phenomenon described in Exodus is physically possible under specific atmospheric conditions, not a violation of physics. A rare natural event, a wind that blew at the right time in the right place with the right strength for the right duration. And notice that the Bible itself says this. Exodus 14:21 says, "The Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land." The text does not say God magically teleported the water. The text says God used a strong east wind. The miracle is not the mechanism. The mechanism is wind and fluid dynamics. The miracle is the timing. The wind blew at exactly the moment the Israelites needed to cross. Physics explains how. Faith explains when and why. Does this mean the miracle is not a miracle? Or does it mean the miracle was performed through natural mechanisms? Does God violate physics, or does God operate through physics? This is not a trivial question. It is one of the deepest questions in the philosophy of religion, and it has divided theologians for centuries. The Mu'tazila school in early Islam argued that God operates through natural laws. The Ash'ari school argued that God directly causes every event, and natural laws are merely habits of God. Thomas Aquinas argued that God is the primary cause working through secondary causes, which are the natural laws. Each position changes entirely how you think about miracles, and each position is compatible with science in different ways. Consider the Mi'raj, the night journey of the Prophet Muhammad described in Quran 17:1 and elaborated in the Hadith literature. In a single night, Muhammad was transported from Mecca to Jerusalem on the Burak, a winged creature, and then ascended through the 7 heavens, meeting the prophets, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and others, and reaching the Sidrat al-Muntaha, boundary of the divine presence, before returning to Mecca before dawn. A physical journey across thousands of kilometers and through the structure of the cosmos in a single night. If you take this as a physical journey through ordinary space, it appears to violate special relativity. Nothing with mass can travel faster than light. But the journey from Mecca to Jerusalem, 1,200 kilometers, is physically possible in a few hours at ordinary speeds. The ascent through the heavens is another matter, unless the journey was not through ordinary space. The Sufi interpretation, which predates modern physics by 8 centuries, says the Miraj was a journey through states of consciousness, not through physical space, an ascent through levels of awareness. A journey inward, not outward. Ibn Arabi in the 12th century described the Miraj as a journey through the Barzakh, the imaginal realm that exists between the physical and the purely spiritual, not physical space. Not purely mental, a third category, an intermediate reality that has its own structure, its own geography, its own inhabitants, a realm that is accessed through consciousness, not through locomotion. Modern neuroscience has concepts that are structurally similar, altered states of consciousness. The DMT research of Rick Strassman at the University of New Mexico documented subjects who reported journeys through structured realms, encounters with intelligent beings, and reception of information that felt more real than ordinary waking. Consciousness. The phenomenology of the DMT experience bears striking structural similarities to the Mirage narrative. Structured realms, ascending levels, encounters with beings, reception of knowledge, return with transformed understanding. More recent research at Imperial College London by Robin Carhart Harris has shown that psychedelics reduce activity in the default mode network, the brain's self-referential system. Less self, more reality. The opposite of what you would expect if the experiences were mere hallucination. I am not saying the Mirage was a DMT experience. I am not reducing the prophet's journey to neurochemistry. I am saying that the relationship between the religious account and the scientific framework is not simple opposition. It is not science says impossible and religion says it happened anyway. It is more complex. Science says ordinary physical travel at superluminal speeds is impossible. The mystical tradition says the travel was not ordinary physical travel. Neuroscience says consciousness can enter states where the phenomenology includes structured journeys through non-physical realms. The conflict dissolves not because one side wins, but because the question was framed incorrectly. The Mirage might not be about physics at all. It might be about consciousness. And consciousness is the one thing that physics cannot explain. Consider the Hindu tradition. The Mahabharata, one of the two great Sanskrit epics composed approximately 2,000 years ago, describes weapons of cosmic destruction in extraordinary detail. The Brahmastra, a weapon invoked through mantra and intense meditation that when launched could destroy the entire world. The Pashupatastra, a weapon from Lord Shiva that could destroy creation itself and return the universe to the primordial void. The Narayanastra, a weapon of Vishnu that sent millions of deadly projectiles and grew more powerful the more you resisted it. The only defense was complete surrender. The descriptions in the Dronaparva and Karnaparva are remarkably specific. Blinding light, brighter than 1,000 suns. Enormous heat that consumed everything in its radius. Devastation that made the land uninhabitable for generations. Survivors reported that their hair and nails fell out, water sources were poisoned, animals died in great numbers, the land was scorched and barren. These descriptions bear unsettling resemblance to nuclear weapons, to thermal radiation, to fallout, to radiation poisoning. Robert Oppenheimer, the theoretical physicist who directed the Manhattan Project, stood in the New Mexico desert on the 16th of July, 1945, and watched the first nuclear detonation at Trinity. The fireball reached temperatures of millions of degrees. The mushroom cloud rose 12 kilometers into the sky. The shockwave shattered windows 200 kilometers away. And Oppenheimer, a Sanskrit scholar who had studied the Bhagavad Gita in the original language at Berkeley, with Professor Arthur Ryder, quietly quoted, Chapter 11, verse 32. Kalosmi loka kshaya krit pravridho. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. He recognized what he was seeing. He had read this description before, in a text composed 2 millennia before the physics of nuclear fission was understood. Was the Mahabharata describing actual advanced weapons used by a lost civilization? Almost certainly not. The archaeological evidence at Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa shows no radiation signatures despite popular claims. There are no verified ancient nuclear reactors. The literal interpretation is not supported, but the phenomenological accuracy of the descriptions remains striking. One possibility is coincidence combined with vivid imagination. Another is that the human mind, when contemplating ultimate destruction, converges on similar imagery across all cultures. A third possibility is that contemplative traditions occasionally access information through means that our current scientific framework does not account for. I present all three honestly. You decide. Tell me in the comments which explanation you find most compelling and why. Consider the Buddhist concept of sunyata. Emptiness, the central teaching of the Madhyamaka school, founded by Nagarjuna in the 2nd century CE. Not nihilistic emptiness, not the claim that nothing exists. The claim that nothing exists the way it appears to exist, that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence, that nothing exists independently from its own side, as the Tibetans say, that everything arises from conditions and ceases when conditions change, that the apparent solidity of the material world is an illusion, that what seems to be substance is actually process, that what seems to be things are actually events, that the chair you are sitting on is not a thing that exists independently. It is a temporary arrangement of conditions that will change when the conditions change. Quantum field theory says the same thing. With mathematics, particles are not things. Particles are excitations of fields, temporary vibrations in underlying quantum fields that pervade all of space. An electron is not a tiny ball of stuff sitting somewhere. An electron is a temporary excitation of the electron field. It arises from the field when conditions are right and returns to the field when conditions change. It has no independent existence apart from the field, no inherent substance, no permanent identity that persists when the excitation ends. It is a process, not a thing, an event, not an object, a verb, not a noun, sunyata, emptiness of inherent existence, described by the Buddha approximately 2,500 years ago in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, formalized by Nagarjuna in the 2nd century, confirmed by quantum field theory in the 20th century. And this is not the only Buddhist physics parallel. The Buddhist concept of pratitya samutpada, dependent origination, states that every phenomenon arises in dependence on other phenomena. Nothing is self-caused. Nothing is uncaused. Everything is part of a web of mutual causation. Modern physics describes the same structure. No particle exists in isolation. Every particle is defined by its interactions with other particles and with the fields that pervade space. Remove any of these relationships, and the particle ceases to be what it is. The electron is its relationships, is its dependencies, is its connections, pratitya samutpada, in the language of quantum numbers and coupling constants. Consider also the Hindu concept of Maya, the veil of illusion, the teaching that the material world, as perceived by the senses, is not ultimate reality, that what we see, touch and measure is a projection from a deeper reality, hidden from ordinary perception. The Mandukya Upanishad says that waking consciousness is just one of 4 states and not the most fundamental. Modern physics has arrived at a structurally identical conclusion through the holographic principle. The 3-dimensional universe we perceive may be a projection of information encoded on a 2-dimensional boundary. Gerard Hooft and Leonard Susskind, building on Jacob Bekenstein's black hole entropy, calculations showed that the fundamental description of reality might be on the boundary, not in the volume. The Hindus said the material world is Maya, a projection from Brahman. Physics says the material world might be holographic, a projection from a lower dimensional boundary. The vocabulary is different. The structure is identical. I want to pause here and ask you something directly. At this point you have heard both conflicts and convergences. Galileo condemned, evolution contradicting creation, but also the Big Bang matching creation ex nihilo, quantum field theory matching Buddhist emptiness, the holographic principle matching Hindu Maya. What is your honest reaction? Are you keeping score for team science or team religion? Or are you starting to suspect that the scorekeeping itself is the problem? That the question is not which team is winning, but whether there are 2 teams at all? Think about it. Tell me in the comments, because your reaction reveals your assumptions. And assumptions are the invisible architecture of every argument you will ever make about this topic. Is this convergence evidence that contemplatives accessed physical truths through meditation? Or is it structural coincidence where two frameworks happen to share similar features? I do not know. The matches are specific enough to be striking. The Buddha did not make vague claims about change. The Buddha made specific claims about emptiness of inherent existence and dependence on conditions that are precisely the features quantum field theory confirms. The match could be coincidence, but it could also be convergence. Two methods of investigating reality arriving at the same structural truth through completely different instruments. Here is what I want you to take from this first part. The relationship between science and religion is not what you were told by either side. It is not a war between reason and superstition as the new atheists claim. It is not a perfect harmony where science confirms everything religion teaches, as some apologists claim. The relationship is tangled, contradictory, uncomfortable for everyone. Science contradicts specific religious claims, and these contradictions are real. The Earth is not 6,000 years old. Radiometric dating using uranium lead decay gives 4.54 billion years, and this is not debatable. Species were not created individually in their current form. The genetic and fossil evidence for evolution is as strong as the evidence for gravity. The Earth is not the center of the universe. These contradictions are real and cannot be honestly dismissed. But science also confirms structural features of religious claims in ways that are equally undeniable. The universe had a beginning from nothing, exactly as Genesis and the Quran describe. The material world is not what it appears to be at the quantum level, exactly as Buddhist and Hindu traditions teach. Consciousness resists every attempt at physical explanation, exactly as every tradition that posits a soul would predict. The fundamental constants are fine-tuned to absurd precision, exactly as a designed universe would require. The convergences are as real as the conflicts. Both things are true simultaneously. Science contradicts religion and science confirms religion, not on the same claims, on different claims. The question is not whether science and religion conflict. They do. The question is not whether science and religion converge. They do. The real question, the question that nobody wants to ask because it is uncomfortable for both sides, is why. Why does the same scientific enterprise that refutes the age of the Earth in Genesis also confirm the creation from nothing in Genesis? Why does the same physics that makes miracles seem impossible also discover that consciousness might be fundamental? Why does the same methodology that demolished the geocentric universe also discover fine-tuning that points toward design? This is the question we will explore across this series, not with answers, with evidence, with physics, with philosophy, with honesty, and with repeated invitations for you to think for yourself. Because this question does not have a YouTube answer. This question has your answer. And your answer might be different from mine. And that is exactly as it should be. I want to hear from you before we continue. In the comments, tell me two things. First, what is the single strongest argument you know for why science and religion genuinely conflict? Not a talking point, not something you heard someone say. The argument that when you think about it honestly at 3 a.m., makes you doubt either your faith or your skepticism, depending on which side you are on. Second, what is the single strongest argument you know for why they might not conflict? The observation or fact or experience that makes you suspect the relationship is more complicated than the simple war narrative. Be specific, be honest, be brave. The most thoughtful responses will be addressed directly in part 2. I am not looking for the most popular answers. I am looking for the most honest ones. In part 2, we leave the history and the narratives behind and go directly into the physics. The specific discoveries in quantum mechanics, particle physics, and cosmology that have made the science versus religion debate radically more complicated than it was a century ago. We will examine the measurement problem, the fact that quantum mechanics appears to give consciousness a role in determining physical reality. We will examine quantum entanglement, the fact that separated particles remain correlated in ways that Einstein called spooky action at a distance, and that every mystical tradition calls the interconnectedness of all things. We will examine the fine-tuning of the 26 free parameters of the Standard Model, the fact that if any of them were slightly different, the universe would produce nothing interesting. We will examine the hard problem of consciousness, the fact that after 4 centuries of modern science, we have no idea how matter produces experience. We will examine unitarity and information conservation, the fact that quantum mechanics forbids the destruction of information, which is structurally identical to what every tradition says about the soul. Each of these discoveries is confirmed physics, not speculation, not philosophy, not interpretation, measured in laboratories, tested to extraordinary precision, published in the most rigorous peer-reviewed journals in science, accepted by the scientific community without controversy. And each of them has implications for the God question that most scientists prefer not to discuss, because the implications are uncomfortable for everyone. The physics is going to surprise you, regardless of which side you are on. I promise you that. In part 1, I showed you the surface, the familiar stories, Galileo, Darwin, the Big Bang, miracles examined through physics, the conflicts and convergences that most people know about, even if they have not thought about them carefully. Now we go deeper, into the physics itself, into the specific discoveries of the last 100 years that have made the relationship between science and religion not simpler, as everyone expected, but radically more complicated. I want to be clear about what I am about to present. Everything in this part is confirmed physics. Not fringe science, not speculation, not YouTube physics. Confirmed, measured, replicated. Published in Nature and Physical Review Letters and Science, and the most rigorous peer-reviewed journals in the world. Accepted by the scientific community. Taught in graduate programs at MIT and Cambridge and Caltech. The physics is not controversial. What is controversial is what the physics implies, and the implications are uncomfortable for everyone, for the atheist and the believer, for the scientist and the theologian, for you. Regardless of what you currently think about God, let us begin with the measurement problem. In 1801, Thomas Young performed the double-slit experiment. He shone light through 2 narrow slits in a barrier and observed an interference pattern on a screen behind the barrier. Bright bands where light waves from the 2 slits arrived in phase and reinforced each other. Dark bands where they arrived out of phase and cancelled. The experiment proved that light is a wave. In 1905, Einstein showed that light also behaves as particles, photons, discrete packets of energy. This was the photoelectric effect. Light is both wave and particle depending on how you look at it. Wave-particle duality. Strange, but manageable. Then came the truly disturbing discovery. In the 1920s, physicists repeated the double-slit experiment with single particles, 1 electron at a time. Fire 1 electron at the barrier with 2 slits. Wait. Fire another. Wait. After thousands of individual electrons, the pattern that emerged on the screen was an interference pattern, the pattern that only waves make. But each electron was a single particle. It went through 1 slit. It hit the screen at one point. How does a stream of individual particles produce a wave pattern? The answer, according to quantum mechanics, is that each electron goes through both slits simultaneously. The electron is in a superposition of going through slit A and going through slit B. The 2 paths interfere with each other like waves, and the interference produces the pattern. The electron is not a particle traveling through 1 slit. The electron is a wave of probability traveling through both slits. Until you look. If you place a detector at the slits to determine which slit the electron goes through, the interference pattern disappears. The electrons behave like ordinary particles, go through 1 slit or the other. No interference, no wave pattern, just two clumps behind the two slits. The act of observing which slit the electron goes through changes its behavior, from wave to particle, from both slits to one slit, from quantum superposition to definite state. This is the measurement problem, the most disturbing unsolved problem in the foundations of physics, and I use the word disturbing deliberately. Richard Feynman, who understood quantum mechanics as deeply as any human being ever, has said that nobody understands quantum mechanics. He was not being modest, he was being accurate. The mathematics works. The predictions are perfect. But nobody knows what the mathematics means. Nobody knows what is really happening when a measurement occurs. The mathematics of quantum mechanics says that before measurement, the electron is in a superposition of states, a wave function denoted psi that encodes all possible outcomes with their probabilities. The wave function is not a description of our ignorance about where the electron is. The wave function is the electron before measurement. The electron does not have a position before you measure its position. It has a probability distribution of positions, all of them simultaneously. This is not a metaphor. This is the mathematical content of quantum mechanics, and the act of measurement causes the wave function to collapse, to jump discontinuously from many possible outcomes to one definite outcome. The wave function evolves smoothly and deterministically according to the Schrödinger equation. Continuous, predictable, beautiful mathematics, until the moment of measurement. Then it jumps, instantaneously, unpredictably, to one specific result, and no one knows why. No one knows what constitutes a measurement. No one knows where the boundary is between the quantum world of superposition and the classical world of definite outcomes. No one knows whether the collapse is a physical process that happens in the world, or a change in the observer's information about the world, or something else entirely that we do not have the conceptual vocabulary to describe. John von Neumann, the mathematician who formalized quantum mechanics in 1932 inches, his book, Mathematical Foundations of Quantum Mechanics, analyzed the measurement chain rigorously. The electron is in superposition. The detector interacts with the electron. Now the detector is in superposition. The recording device reads the detector. Now the recording device is in superposition. The scientist reads the recording device. Now the scientist's retina is in superposition. The neural signals travel to the brain. Now the brain is in superposition. Where does the chain end? Where does the superposition become a definite outcome? Von Neumann argued that the chain must end at consciousness. The conscious mind of the observer is what causes the collapse, not the detector, not the instrument, not the recording device, not the retina, not the neuron, the awareness, the subjective experience of knowing the result. Consciousness is the boundary between the quantum and the classical. Eugene Wigner, the Nobel laureate and one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century, took this further. In his 1961 essay Remarks on the Mind-Body Question, he argued explicitly that consciousness is essential to quantum mechanics, that without a conscious observer, the wave function never collapses, that the material universe exists in superposition until a mind observes it. Wigner was not a mystic. He was not a theologian. He was a mathematical physicist of the highest caliber, and he concluded from the mathematics that consciousness is not a byproduct of physics. Consciousness is a prerequisite for physics. Now, let me be brutally honest about the state of this debate. The von Neumann-Wigner interpretation is not the mainstream interpretation of quantum mechanics. Most physicists today do not believe that consciousness causes collapse. The mainstream interpretations include the Copenhagen interpretation, which is agnostic about what causes collapse, The many worlds interpretation, which says collapse never happens and every possible outcome occurs in a separate branch of reality. Decoherence theory, which explains how quantum superpositions become practically indistinguishable from definite states through interaction with the environment without requiring consciousness. The de Broglie-Bohm pilot wave theory, which says particles always have definite positions and the wave function guides them. None of these mainstream interpretations require consciousness, but here is the honest, uncomfortable truth. None of them solve the measurement problem either. Copenhagen refuses to answer the question. Many worlds replaces one mystery with another, an infinity of unobservable parallel universes. Decoherence explains the appearance of collapse, but not collapse itself. Pilot wave theory requires non-local hidden variables. After 100 years of quantum mechanics, the measurement problem remains unsolved. The role of the observer remains unclear, and the possibility that consciousness is fundamental to quantum mechanics has not been ruled out. Every religious tradition says consciousness is fundamental to reality. That awareness is not a byproduct of matter, but a ground of being. That mind precedes matter. The Quran says God created the heavens and the earth in truth. The act of creation is conscious, intentional, aware. Hindu philosophy says consciousness, chit, is one of the three fundamental aspects of Brahman, alongside being Sat and bliss Ananda. Buddhism says mind is the forerunner of all actions. Christianity says, in the beginning was the Word, the Logos, the conscious, rational principle. Quantum mechanics has not proven that these traditions are right, but quantum mechanics has failed to prove they are wrong. After 100 years, the most successful physical theory ever developed still cannot explain measurement without at least raising the question of whether consciousness is involved. This is not an argument for God, but it is the end of the argument that physics has eliminated the need for consciousness as a fundamental feature of reality. That argument is dead, killed by the measurement problem, and nobody has buried it yet. I want you to think about this. Really think. If you are a materialist who believes consciousness is just neurons firing, does it trouble you that the most fundamental theory in physics cannot explain its most basic operation without at least considering that consciousness might be involved? If you are a believer who thinks consciousness is fundamental, does it comfort you? Or does the uncertainty of the physics make you uncomfortable too? Tell me in the comments. Now, quantum entanglement. In 1935, Einstein, along with Boris Podolsky and Nathan Rosen, published a paper arguing that quantum mechanics must be incomplete. Their argument, which became known as the EPR paradox, was based on entanglement. When two particles interact and become entangled, their quantum states are correlated. Measuring one particle instantly determines the state of the other, no matter how far apart they are. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance and argued it was absurd, that it violated locality, the principle that physical influences cannot travel faster than light, that the particles must have hidden variables, predetermined properties that explain the correlations without requiring instantaneous communication. In 1964, John Bell proved a theorem that changed everything. Bell's theorem showed that if hidden variables exist, they must be non-local. That no local hidden variable theory can reproduce the predictions of quantum mechanics. The correlations between entangled particles are too strong, stronger than any local mechanism can produce. The universe must choose between locality and hidden variables. It cannot have both. In 1982, Alain Aspect performed the decisive experiment in Paris. He measured entangled photons with detector settings chosen randomly while the photons were in flight. The settings were changed using acoustic optical switches that operated faster than light could travel between the two detectors. This eliminated any possibility that the photons could communicate their settings to each other. Any possible signal between the detectors would need to travel faster than light. The results violated Bell's inequality by a margin of 5 standard deviations, far beyond the threshold of statistical significance. Quantum mechanics was right. Einstein was wrong. The correlations are real. The universe is non-local. What does non-locality mean physically? It means that separated particles remain connected in ways that transcend the ordinary structure of space. What happens to one entangled particle instantaneously determines the state of its partner, regardless of the distance between them. Not through any signal traveling through space, not through any known physical medium, not through any force or field, through entanglement itself, a connection that exists outside of the spatial structure that physics normally describes, a connection that does not diminish with distance, that is as strong across 1 billion light years as across a millimeter, that is instantaneous, not limited by the speed of light. That seems to require a deeper level of reality beneath the space-time we observe. In 2022, Aspect, along with John Clauser and Anton Zeilinger, won the Nobel Prize in Physics for experiments establishing the violation of Bell inequalities and pioneering quantum information science. The non-locality of the universe is not debatable. It is Nobel Prize physics. The universe is connected at a level deeper than space. This is measured, this is confirmed, this is real. And every mystical tradition has been saying exactly this for millennia. That separation is illusion. That all things are connected at a level deeper than the apparent spatial separation between them. The Sufi concept of Wahdat al-Wujud, the unity of being formulated by Ibn Arabi in the 13th century, says there is only one reality, and all apparent separations are projections of a deeper unity. The Hindu concept of Brahman says the one universal consciousness underlies all individual consciousnesses the way one ocean underlies all waves. Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, the philosophy of non-duality, says that the perception of multiplicity is Maya illusion, and the true nature of reality is one undivided whole. The Buddhist concept of Indra's net from the Avatamsaka Sutra describes a cosmic web where every node contains a jewel that reflects every other jewel infinitely. Each point in the web contains information about every other point. Each part contains the whole. The whole is present in every part. Quantum entanglement is not Indra's net. I want to be precise about this because precision matters. Entanglement is a specific physical phenomenon described by tensor products of Hilbert spaces with specific mathematical properties and specific experimental signatures. Indra's net is a philosophical metaphor describing universal interconnectedness. They are not the same thing. The mathematics of entanglement does not map exactly onto the philosophy of Indra's net, but the structural correspondence is striking. Both describe a reality where separated parts remain connected, where what happens here affects what happens there without any signal traveling between them, where the whole is somehow encoded in every part, and the Buddhist description was articulated approximately 1500 years before Bell proved the theorem. An aspect measured the violation. Now, the fine-tuning of fundamental constants. The standard model of particle physics has 26 free parameters, numbers that must be measured experimentally because the theory does not predict them. The masses of the 6 quarks, the masses of the 3 charged leptons, the masses of the neutrinos, the coupling constants of the 3 forces, the parameters of the CKM matrix that describes quark mixing, the Higgs vacuum expectation value, the cosmological constant, 26 numbers that define our universe, and if any of them were slightly different, the universe would produce nothing interesting. I covered the Higgs fine-tuning in detail in the God particle series, but the Higgs is not the only fine-tuned parameter. The strong nuclear force coupling constant, if changed by more than about 2% in either direction, would prevent the formation of stable nuclei heavier than hydrogen. No carbon, no oxygen, no life. The electromagnetic coupling constant, the fine structure constant, 1/137, if changed by more than about 4%, would prevent stable atoms from forming. The ratio of the electromagnetic force to the gravitational force is approximately 10 to the 36. If it were 10 to the 33 instead, stars would be 1 billion times less massive and would burn 1 million times faster. No time for evolution, no time for life. The cosmological constant, the energy density of the vacuum, is the most extreme example of fine-tuning in all of physics. Quantum field theory predicts that the vacuum should have an energy density of approximately 10 to the 113 joules per cubic meter. The measured value is approximately 10 to the -9 joules per cubic meter. The prediction is wrong by a factor of 10 to the 122. This is the largest discrepancy between theory and experiment in the history of science. And the measured value is not zero. It is a tiny positive number. If it was zero, that would be explainable by a symmetry. If it were the predicted large positive number, galaxies would never have formed. Stars would never have ignited. Life would be impossible. The actual value sits at a point that is small enough for structure to form but large enough to be non-zero. A value fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 122. To put this in perspective, if you randomly threw a dart at a dartboard the size of the observable universe, you would need to hit a target the size of a single atom to match this precision. Not approximately. Exactly. Roger Penrose calculated the probability of our specific low-entropy initial conditions for the Big Bang at 1 in 10 to the 10 to the 123. That is not 10 to the 123. That is 10 raised to the power of 10 to the 123. A number so large that writing it out in ordinary notation would require more digits than there are particles in the observable universe. This is the precision with which the initial conditions of the universe appear to be selected. Not tuned, not adjusted, selected. As if someone chose the initial state from an astronomically vast space of possible states and picked the one that would produce galaxies, stars, planets, chemistry, and beings capable of calculating the probability of their own existence. The physicist Freeman Dyson said it best. The more I examine the universe and the details of its architecture, the more evidence I find that the universe in some sense must have known we were coming. Fred Hoyle, the astrophysicist, who predicted the carbon resonance that allows carbon to be produced in stars, and who was famously atheist, said that a common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect has monkeyed. With physics as well as chemistry and biology, he called the fine-tuning a put-up job. Even an atheist found the evidence pointing toward design. The atheist response to fine-tuning is typically the multiverse. If there are enough universes with random constants, eventually some will have constants that allow life. We observe a fine-tuned universe because we can only exist in a fine-tuned universe. Selection effect, anthropic principle, no designer needed. The response has 3 problems. First, it is not testable. We cannot observe other universes. We cannot measure their constants. We cannot verify that they exist. A theory that explains everything by positing an unobservable infinity explains nothing. Second, the multiverse does not actually eliminate fine-tuning. The multiverse itself requires a mechanism to generate different constants. That mechanism, the string landscape or eternal inflation, has its own parameters that might themselves be fine-tuned. You push the fine-tuning back one level but do not eliminate it. Third, the multiverse is exactly as unfalsifiable as God. If you reject God because God is not testable, you must reject the multiverse for the same reason. If you accept the multiverse despite its untestability, you have no principled reason to reject God on the grounds of untestability. The playing field is level. This is an uncomfortable observation for both sides. The believer cannot claim that fine-tuning proves God because the multiverse is a logically possible alternative. The atheist cannot claim that the multiverse explains fine-tuning because the multiverse is as untestable as God. Both positions require faith. The believer has faith in a designer, the atheist has faith in a multiverse. Neither can prove their position. Both are honest responses to the same data. And the data is that the universe appears to be calibrated for life with a precision that defies accident. What do you think? I am asking sincerely. Does the fine-tuning evidence change your position at all? Does it make you more or less confident in your current view? Or does it simply confirm what you already believed? If it confirms what you already believed, be suspicious of that confirmation. Confirmation bias is the most powerful cognitive distortion humans possess. The ability to see evidence for our position in everything. The fine-tuning evidence should make everyone uncomfortable, believers and atheists alike, because it is genuinely ambiguous. And genuinely ambiguous evidence is the most honest kind. Now, the hard problem of consciousness. In 1995, David Chalmers published The Conscious Mind and formulated what he called the hard problem of consciousness. The problem is simple to state. Why does subjective experience exist? Why does it feel like something to see red? Why does pain hurt? Why is there an inner experience accompanying the brain's information processing? A computer can process the wavelength 700 nanometers and label it red, but the computer does not experience redness, does not have the quale, the subjective sensation, the inner experience of what red looks like from the inside. You do. Why? Neuroscience can explain the mechanisms, can trace the neural pathways from the retina through the lateral geniculate nucleus to the primary visual cortex, V1, can identify which neurons fire when you see red, can map the entire information processing pipeline from photon to perception. Neuroscience can explain the easy problems of consciousness, how the brain discriminates stimuli, how it integrates information, how it controls behavior, how it reports mental states, all the functional aspects of consciousness, the machinery, the plumbing, the wiring diagram. But neuroscience cannot explain why the machinery produces experience, why there is something it is like to be you, why the information processing is accompanied by subjective awareness. This is the hard problem. And after 3 decades, it remains unsolved. Not unsolved in the sense that we are making slow progress. Unsolved in the sense that we do not even have a plausible framework for how a solution would work. We do not know how to get from neurons firing to the experience of redness. We do not know what kind of explanation would bridge the gap. We do not even know if the gap can be bridged within the materialist framework. Some philosophers and scientists have concluded that it cannot. That consciousness is not reducible to physical processes. That subjective experience is a fundamental feature of reality not derivable from the objective description of matter. This is the position of property dualism, or neutral monism, or panpsychism, depending on the specific formulation. Giulio Tononi's integrated information theory. IIT proposes that consciousness is identical with integrated information, and that any system with sufficient integrated information is conscious regardless of whether it is biological. Philip Goff has argued for panpsychism the view that consciousness is a fundamental feature of matter itself, like mass or charge. David Chalmers himself has suggested that the laws of psychophysics, the laws relating physical processes to conscious experience, may be fundamental laws of nature alongside the laws of physics. Every religious tradition says consciousness is fundamental, not a product of matter, not an epiphenomenon, not a byproduct, a fundamental reality. The Islamic concept of ruh, the spirit breathed into Adam by God, is a conscious principle that exists independently of the body. The Hindu concept of Atman, the true self, is pure consciousness underlying all experience. The Buddhist concept of vijnana santana, the consciousness stream, persists through and beyond physical embodiment. The Christian concept of the soul is a conscious entity that survives the death of the body. Science has not proven any of these claims, but science has also not disproven them. And the reason science has not disproven them is not because science has not tried. Science has tried. Neuroscience has thrown everything it has at the problem of consciousness for decades, and the hard problem remains hard. The gap between neurons and experience remains unbridged. The possibility that consciousness is fundamental remains open, not because of ignorance, because of evidence. The evidence that every attempt to reduce consciousness to physics has failed. Now, the final piece: unitarity and information conservation. In quantum mechanics, the evolution of a quantum system is described by the Schrödinger equation. The Schrödinger equation is unitary. This means that information is conserved. Every quantum process is reversible. No information is ever lost. This is not an approximation, not a useful fiction. It is a mathematical theorem derived from the structure of quantum mechanics itself. Unitarity is as fundamental to quantum mechanics as the conservation of energy is to classical mechanics. It cannot be violated without destroying the theory. This has a profound consequence. If consciousness is quantum information as the Penrose-Hameroff-Orch-OR model proposes, then consciousness cannot be destroyed. The information that constitutes your conscious experience is conserved by the laws of quantum mechanics. When the brain dies, the quantum information does not disappear. It delocalizes, spreads into the environment, changes form, but persists, is conserved by the most fundamental law of the most successful theory in the history of physics. Every religious tradition says the soul survives death. Islam says the nafs returns to God. Christianity says the soul is immortal. Hinduism says the Atman is eternal. Buddhism says the consciousness stream continues. And quantum mechanics says information is conserved, is never destroyed, persists through every transformation. I am not claiming that unitarity proves the soul exists. I am claiming that unitarity proves that the information constituting consciousness is not destroyed at death if consciousness is quantum information. The if is important. It has not been resolved, but the physics of the if is clear, and the physics matches what the traditions claim. So where does this leave us? Let me summarize what the physics says. Not what I say, not what any theologian says, what the confirmed, measured, replicated physics says. The measurement problem says consciousness might be fundamental to the operation of reality at the quantum level. After 100 years and billions of dollars in research, the role of the observer in quantum mechanics has not been eliminated. It has been argued about, debated, reinterpreted, and reformulated, but not eliminated. The possibility remains open, and the possibility is structurally identical to what every religious tradition claims about the primacy of consciousness. Quantum entanglement says the universe is non-local, that separated particles remain connected in ways that transcend the ordinary structure of space, that the universe is more interconnected at its deepest level than the spatial separation between objects suggests. This is Nobel Prize physics, and it is structurally identical to what every mystical tradition describes as the unity of being. Fine-tuning, says the 26 free parameters of the standard model plus the cosmological constant plus the initial conditions of the Big Bang are calibrated for the existence of complex structure and life with a precision that ranges from 1 part in 10 to the 2 to 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123. This is measured, and it is structurally identical to what every theistic tradition describes as intentional creation. The hard problem says consciousness cannot be reduced to physical processes despite 3 decades of focused effort by the best neuroscientists in the world. The gap between neurons firing and subjective experience remains unbridged. And the persistence of this gap is structurally identical to what every tradition that posits a soul or a spirit claims about the irreducibility of consciousness to matter. Unitarity says quantum information is never destroyed, is conserved through every transformation, cannot be erased, cannot be deleted, persists through death if consciousness is quantum information. And this is structurally identical to what every tradition claims about the survival of consciousness after physical death. None of this proves God exists. I have said it before, and I will keep saying it because intellectual honesty requires it. The measurement problem might be solved by decoherence without consciousness. Entanglement might be a purely physical phenomenon with no mystical implications. Fine-tuning might be explained by a multiverse we cannot observe. The hard problem might eventually yield to neuroscience we have not yet developed. Unitarity might not apply to consciousness because consciousness might not be quantum information. Every door I have opened in this video has an alternative explanation that does not involve God. Every single one. But notice the pattern. Every alternative explanation requires something unobserved. Decoherence does not actually explain collapse. The multiverse cannot be tested. Future neuroscience does not yet exist. The claim that consciousness is not quantum information is an assumption, not a proof. The materialist position is not standing on solid ground looking down at speculation. The materialist position is standing on a series of promissory notes. Notes that say we will explain this eventually. Without God. Somehow. Give us time. And maybe they will. Maybe in 50 years every one of these problems will be solved in purely materialist terms. It is possible, but it has not happened yet. And the trend line over the last century has been moving in the opposite direction. Every decade the problems get harder, not easier. The measurement problem is not closer to solution than it was in 1932. The hard problem is not closer to solution than it was in 1995. The fine-tuning has gotten more extreme, not less, as we discover more parameters that require calibration. Think about that, and tell me honestly in the comments, is the trend line going where the materialists promised it would go, or is it going somewhere else entirely? In part 3 we go beneath the physics to the philosophy, the question of what knowledge is, the question of whether science is the only valid way of knowing, the question of whether there are truths that science by its own methodology cannot access. Epistemology, the theory of knowledge itself. This is where the real battle between science and religion is fought. Not in the data, not in the experiments, not in the equations, in the assumptions about what counts as evidence, what counts as knowledge, what counts as real. And these assumptions are invisible to most people on both sides of the debate. Making them visible is the most important thing this series can do, because once you see the assumptions you can question them, and once you question them you can think freely, perhaps for the first time. There is a war between science and religion, but the war is not about the data, not about the experiments, not about the fossils or the equations or the telescopes or the particle accelerators. The war is about something deeper, something invisible, something that both sides assume without examining, something that determines the outcome of every argument before the argument begins. The war is about epistemology, the theory of knowledge, the question of what counts as knowledge, what counts as evidence, what counts as real. And until you understand epistemology, you cannot understand the science and religion debate. You can only participate in it blindly, swinging at shadows, arguing about conclusions when the real disagreement is about premises, about foundations, about the invisible rules that determine what kind of answers are allowed before any question is asked. Let me show you what I mean. A scientist says there is no evidence for God. A believer says there is evidence everywhere. They are not disagreeing about the evidence. They are disagreeing about what counts as evidence. The scientist means there is no empirical evidence. no measurement, no data point, no observation that can be replicated in a laboratory and published in a peer-reviewed journal. The believer means there is experiential evidence, the direct experience of the divine in prayer, the moral intuition that points toward a transcendent source, the fine-tuning of the universe that points toward intention, the existence of consciousness that points toward something beyond matter, the beauty of mathematics that points toward a rational ground of being. Both are telling the truth. There is no empirical evidence for God in the scientific sense, and there is evidence for God in the experiential, philosophical, and structural sense. They are not contradicting each other. They are using the word evidence to mean different things, and because neither side examines what it means by evidence, the argument goes nowhere. Has gone nowhere for 4 centuries, will go nowhere forever until the epistemological question is addressed. What is knowledge? This is the most important question in philosophy. More important than what exists, or what is good, or what is true. Because before you can ask what is true, you need to know what kind of thing truth is, how you recognize it, how you verify it, how you distinguish it from error. The answer determines everything else. Western philosophy has produced 3 major answers. The first is rationalism. Knowledge comes from reason, from logical deduction, from mathematical proof, from the pure operation of the mind, independent of sensory experience. René Descartes, sitting alone in a room in 1641, doubting everything he could possibly doubt, arrived at one certainty: cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. The one thing that cannot be doubted is the existence of the doubter. From this foundation, Descartes attempted to rebuild all knowledge through pure reason. Leibniz pursued the same project. Spinoza constructed an entire metaphysics more geometrico, in the manner of geometry, from definitions and axioms to theorems and proofs. The rationalists argued that the senses are unreliable, that they deceive us constantly through optical illusions, perceptual biases, hallucinations, and dreams. A stick looks bent in water but is straight. The sun looks small but is enormous. Colours do not exist in the external world, only wavelengths. Sounds do not exist in the external world, only pressure waves. Nearly everything your senses tell you is misleading in some way. Only reason is reliable. Only logic produces certainty. Only mathematical proof is beyond doubt. The rationalist tradition produced extraordinary results. Euclidean geometry, formal logic, the foundations of mathematics. The ability to derive truths about the structure of reality through pure thought without looking at anything. The second is empiricism. Knowledge comes from experience, from sensory observation, from measurement, from experiment. John Locke argued in 1690 that the mind at birth is a tabula rasa, a blank slate, and all knowledge enters through the senses. David Hume pushed this further, arguing that even causality, the idea that one event causes another, is not a feature of reality, but a habit of the mind. We see one billiard ball hit another, and the second moves. We infer causation, but all we actually observed was sequence. First this, then that. The causation is added by our minds, not observed in the world. Hume's empiricism was devastating. It undermined not only religion but science itself. If causality is a habit, not a fact, then scientific laws are descriptions of past regularities, not guarantees of future behavior. The sun has risen every morning for billions of years. Empiricism alone cannot guarantee it will rise tomorrow, only that it has risen so far. The empiricist tradition nevertheless produced modern science. The scientific method, the experimental approach, the demand that every claim be tested against observation, the insistence on replication, the peer review system. the extraordinary technological civilization you are currently using to watch this video on a device that would be indistinguishable from magic to anyone born before 1900. The third is Kantian synthesis. Immanuel Kant in 1781 argued in the Critique of Pure Reason that both rationalism and empiricism are incomplete, and that their incompleteness explains their failures. Knowledge requires both. The mind contributes structure, categories like space and time, causality and substance. These are not learned from experience. They are the preconditions that make experience possible. You cannot observe space. Space is the framework within which observation occurs. You cannot observe causality directly as Hume showed. Causality is the framework within which you organize observations. The mind is not a blank slate passively receiving data. The mind is an active organizer imposing structure on the raw data of the senses. But Kant equally argued that the structure without the data is empty. Pure reason without observation produces no knowledge of the actual world. Descartes cannot deduce the existence of God from pure thought, no matter how clever the argument. You need both. Reason provides the framework. Experience provides the content. Neither alone is sufficient. Together they produce knowledge. Together they produce science. But Kant made another argument that is almost always overlooked in the science and religion debate, and it might be the most important argument any philosopher has ever made. Kant argued that human knowledge is limited to phenomena, to things as they appear to us, to the world as filtered through our categories of space, time, and causality. The world as it is in itself, what Kant called the ding and sitch, the thing in itself, the noumenon, is forever beyond our knowledge. We can never know reality, as it is independent of how it appears to our minds. We can never step outside our cognitive framework and see the world raw, unfiltered, unprocessed by human categories. Our knowledge is bounded, structurally bounded, not bounded by the limits of current technology which might be overcome, bounded by the structure of human cognition which cannot be overcome because it is the tool we use to know anything at all. This means there are truths about reality that are real, but that we cannot access through the faculties of reason and observation that produce science. Not because we have not tried hard enough, not because we need better telescopes or more powerful accelerators, because the truths are of a kind that our cognitive apparatus is not designed to reach. The way a two-dimensional being living on a flat surface cannot perceive height, not because height does not exist, because the being lacks the dimension required to perceive it. Now here is where this gets directly relevant to the science and religion debate. Scientism is the belief that science is the only valid form of knowledge, that if something cannot be measured, tested, and replicated by the scientific method, then it is not real, not knowledge, not true. Scientism is not science. This distinction is critical. Science is a method, a tool, a way of investigating a specific domain. Scientism is a philosophy, a worldview, a metaphysical claim about the nature of reality. Science says we investigate the natural world through observation and experiment. Scientism says the natural world is all there is. Science is humble. It knows its scope. It says here is what we can measure and here is what we found. Scientism is totalizing. It says what we cannot measure does not exist. And most importantly, scientism is self-refuting. The claim that science is the only valid form of knowledge is not itself a scientific claim. You cannot design an experiment to test it. You cannot build a detector that measures whether science is the only valid epistemology. You cannot run a controlled trial with a treatment group that uses only science and a control group that uses other ways of knowing and measure which produces more truth. The claim is philosophical. It belongs to epistemology. to the branch of philosophy that examines the nature of knowledge, and it cannot be justified by the very method it claims is the only valid method. Scientism is a philosophical claim that denies the validity of philosophical claims. It refutes itself the moment it is stated, and this is not the only self-limitation of the scientific method. In 1931, Kurt Gödel proved the incompleteness theorems. The first theorem states that any consistent formal system powerful enough to express basic arithmetic contains statements that are true but cannot be proven within the system. Mathematics itself, the most rigorous formal system ever devised by human minds, is incomplete. There are mathematical truths that are true and that mathematics cannot prove. If mathematics, the language of science, has inherent limits, then science, which depends on mathematics, inherits those limits. There are truths that science cannot reach, not because of insufficient data or inadequate technology, but because of the logical structure of formal systems themselves. Gödel proved that completeness is impossible, that any system powerful enough to describe reality will contain truths it cannot prove. The expectation that science will eventually explain everything is not just unfulfilled, it is mathematically impossible. Gödel proved it in 1931, and the implications for scientism are devastating. This matters because the most common argument against religion in the modern world is not a scientific argument, it is scientism. The argument is not here is specific evidence that God does not exist. The argument is there is no scientific evidence for God, therefore God does not exist. The hidden premise is that scientific evidence is the only valid evidence. That hidden premise is scientism, and scientism is self-refuting. The argument collapses at the foundation, not because God exists. I am not making that argument. Because the argument against God based on the absence of scientific evidence depends on a philosophical claim that cannot be scientifically justified, and that is mathematically undermined by Gödel's theorem. The argument is broken. Whatever the truth about God turns out to be, this particular argument against God does not work. But let me be fair. Let me present the other side with equal force. Because the religious traditions have their own epistemological problems. The most serious epistemological problem for religion is the problem of religious diversity. If mystical experience is a valid form of knowledge about the nature of reality, then why do different mystics in different traditions report different things? The Christian mystic Saint Teresa of Avila experienced the interior castle and the spiritual marriage with Christ. The Muslim mystic Rumi experienced fana annihilation of the self in God and bhaka subsistence in God. The Hindu mystic Ramana Maharshi experienced the dissolution of the individual self into pure undifferentiated awareness. The Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh experienced interbeing, the interpenetration of all phenomena. If they are all accessing the same underlying reality, why are their descriptions different? Why does one see Christ and another see Allah and another see Brahman and another see emptiness? If mystical experience is a reliable source of knowledge, it should converge on the same truths the way scientific experiments converge on the same results, regardless of who performs them. And here is what is remarkable. It does converge, at a structural level, to a degree that demands explanation. William James, the Harvard psychologist, documented this in The Varieties of Religious Experience in 1902. After examining mystical reports from every major tradition and many minor ones, James identified 4 universal features. Ineffability, the experience cannot be adequately described in words. Every mystic in every tradition says language fails. Noetic quality, the experience feels like knowledge, not hallucination. The mystic is certain they have accessed something real, something true, something more real than ordinary experience. Transiency, the experience is temporary, lasting minutes or hours, but not permanently. And passivity, the experience happens to you rather than being produced by you. You can prepare for it through practice, but you cannot force it. Later researchers have added to James's list. Walter Stace identified a sense of unity as the central feature, the dissolution of the boundary between self and world, the experience of being one with everything. Ralph Hood developed the mysticism scale, a psychometric instrument that measures mystical experience across traditions and has been validated in Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, and secular populations. The common core of mystical experience, unity, transcendence, sacredness, noetic quality, ineffability, appears in every tradition tested. The structural convergence is empirical, measured, replicated, published. It is as well established as any finding in psychology, but the interpretive frameworks differ radically. The Christian mystic interprets the experience of unity as union with Christ through the Holy Spirit. The Muslim mystic interprets it as fana dissolution in the divine unity of Tawheed. The Hindu mystic interprets it as the realization that Atman is Brahman, that the individual self is the universal self. The Buddhist mystic interprets it as the direct perception of sunyata, the emptiness of inherent existence. Same structural experience, radically different theological interpretations. The question is whether the raw experience or the theological interpretation is the valid knowledge. If the experience is the knowledge, then all traditions are accessing the same reality, and the differences are linguistic and cultural, not ontological. The mystics all found the same thing and described it in the vocabulary of their tradition, the way physicists in different countries discover the same particles and describe them in different languages. If the interpretation is the knowledge, then the traditions fundamentally contradict each other, and at most, one can be correct about the nature of ultimate reality. This is a genuine problem. I will not pretend it is not. The diversity of interpretive frameworks is a real challenge to the claim that mystical experience provides reliable knowledge about the specific nature of the divine. The challenge weakens some religious claims while leaving others intact. But here is where the argument takes an unexpected turn that should make scientists uncomfortable. Science has exactly the same problem. Exactly. Different interpretations of quantum mechanics describe radically different realities. The Copenhagen interpretation says the wave function is a calculation tool, not a physical entity. Many worlds says the wave function is the most real thing there is, and every possible outcome occurs in a separate branch of a continuously splitting reality. Pilot wave theory says particles always have definite positions guided by a real physical wave. Cubism says quantum mechanics describes an individual agent's beliefs about future experiences, not objective physical reality. Relational quantum mechanics says quantum states are not absolute properties but relations between systems. These are not minor technical quibbles. These are fundamentally incompatible descriptions of what reality is. Copenhagen says there is one world with random measurement outcomes. Many worlds says there are infinitely many worlds with every outcome realized. These cannot both be true. They contradict each other as directly as the Trinity contradicts Tawheed. And yet physicists use quantum mechanics successfully every day without resolving this interpretive disagreement. They perform the same experiments, get the same data, make the same predictions, build the same technologies, and disagree completely about what the mathematics means about the fundamental nature of reality. Sound familiar? It should. It is structurally identical to the problem of religious diversity, the same underlying experience or data. Radically different interpretive frameworks. Fundamental disagreement about what the experience or data means about ultimate reality. And the practice continues successfully despite the unresolved interpretive conflict. If you are willing to accept quantum mechanics as valid and enormously productive knowledge, despite the unresolved disagreement among physicists about what the mathematics means, you have no principled reason to reject mystical experience. as potentially valid knowledge on the grounds that traditions disagree about what the experience means. If you reject mystical experience because mystics disagree about interpretation, consistency demands that you reject quantum mechanics because physicists disagree about interpretation. The epistemological structure is identical, and the selective application of the standard applying it to religion but not to physics or vice versa reveals not intellectual rigor but cognitive bias. I want you to sit with this for a moment. This is not a comfortable observation for anyone. If you are a scientist who dismisses religious knowledge because the traditions contradict each other, look at your own field. The interpretations of quantum mechanics contradict each other just as fundamentally. If you are a believer who dismisses scientific criticism of your tradition, apply the same criticism to rival traditions. The standard must be applied consistently to every claim, every tradition, every interpretation, including your own, especially your own. Now, let me introduce a framework that I think is more productive than either scientism or fideism. Stephen Jay Gould, the evolutionary biologist, proposed the concept of non-overlapping magisteria, or noma, in his 1999 book, Rocks of Ages. The idea is simple and appealing. Science covers the empirical realm. What is the universe made of? How does it work? What are the laws that govern physical processes? Religion covers the realm of meaning and value. Why does the universe exist? What is the purpose of human life? What is good and what is evil? How should we live? What happens after we die? The two magisteria do not overlap. Science cannot answer questions about meaning and value. Religion cannot answer questions about empirical facts. They are different tools for different questions. A telescope for the stars, a moral compass for the soul. You do not criticize a telescope for failing to provide moral guidance. You do not criticize a moral compass for failing to show you Jupiter's moons. Each tool does what it does, and what it does not do is not a failure. It is a scope limitation. Noma is appealing because it eliminates conflict by definition. If science and religion do not overlap, they cannot contradict each other. Galileo was wrong to use the telescope to challenge theology. The Church was wrong to use theology to challenge the telescope. Each should have stayed in its lane. The conflict was a category error, a jurisdiction violation, a carpenter trying to do plumbing, a plumber trying to do carpentry. Just do your own job. Noma is diplomatic. It is clean. It lets both sides coexist without fighting, and it is wrong, or at least dangerously incomplete. And the evidence from part 2 is exactly why. The magisteria overlap. This is not a philosophical claim. This is an empirical observation. Quantum mechanics raises questions about the role of consciousness in determining physical reality. These are simultaneously physics questions and consciousness questions, and consciousness is the central concern of every religious tradition. Fine-tuning raises questions about whether the universe was intentionally designed. This is simultaneously a cosmology question and a theology question. The hard problem of consciousness raises questions about whether consciousness is reducible to matter. This is simultaneously a neuroscience question and a soul question. Information conservation raises questions about whether the information constituting consciousness persists after death. This is simultaneously a quantum mechanics question and an afterlife question. These are not questions about meaning and value being addressed by physics on a side quest. These are the primary results of fundamental physics directly impacting the core claims of religious traditions. Science is not staying in its lane. Science is driving directly into the territory that religion has occupied for 4,000 years, not intentionally. Not because physicists wanted to find evidence for God, Most physicists would be delighted if the evidence pointed firmly away from anything resembling religious claims, but it does not. The data led where it led. The equations pointed where they pointed. The measurements revealed what they revealed. A universe that looks far more like what the contemplative traditions described than what materialist philosophy of the 19th century predicted. The magisteria do not merely touch at the edges, they overlap at the foundations, at the level of consciousness and fine-tuning and information, and the fundamental nature of reality itself. What I propose instead of Noma is something more honest and more uncomfortable. I call it convergent investigation, though the name matters less than the idea. Science and religion are two methods of investigating the same reality. They use different instruments. Science uses mathematics, observation, experiment, and replication. Religion uses contemplation, prayer, meditation, moral practice, and community. They use different standards of evidence. Science demands repeatability and quantification. Religion relies on phenomenological report and interpretive tradition. They speak different languages. Science speaks in equations and data points. Religion speaks in metaphor and narrative and liturgy and silence. But they are investigating the same thing: reality, the nature of existence, the foundation of being, what is here, what is real, what matters. And sometimes they converge. Not always. Sometimes they genuinely conflict. As we saw in part 1 with the age of the Earth and evolution and the geocentric model, these conflicts are real. They cannot be explained away. They represent places where religion made specific empirical claims and science demonstrated those claims to be false. But sometimes the results converge. As we saw in part 2 with the measurement problem and entanglement and fine-tuning, and the hard problem and information conservation, these convergences are also real. They also cannot be explained away. They represent places where the most rigorous empirical investigation arrives at structures that match what the contemplative traditions have been reporting for millennia. Both the conflicts and the convergences are data. Both deserve attention. Both resist dismissal. The honest approach takes both seriously. Does not cherry-pick the conflicts to argue that religion is obsolete. Does not cherry-pick the convergences to argue that science proves God. Takes all of it, the conflicts and the convergences, the failures and the successes, the places where religion got it wrong and the places where religion appears to have gotten it right before science even arrived. And here is the philosophical key that holds everything together. The investigation is not complete on either side. Science is not finished. The standard model has 26 unexplained parameters. The measurement problem is unsolved after 100 years. The hard problem of consciousness is unsolved after 3 decades. Quantum gravity, the unification of quantum mechanics and general relativity, is unsolved after 90 years. Dark matter, constituting 27% of the universe, is unidentified. Dark energy, constituting 68% of the universe, is unexplained. 95% of the universe is made of stuff we have not identified. Science is at best 5% of the way through its investigation, maybe less, and religion is not finished either. Theology continues to develop, contemplative practice continues to deepen. Interfaith dialogue is producing new synthesis. Mystical phenomenology continues to accumulate and be studied rigorously for the first time in the work of researchers like Matthew Rappaport and Andrew Newberg. Neither side has reached its final answer, and claiming that either side has won the argument when both sides are still actively investigating is like declaring the winner of a chess game after the opening moves. The end game has not been played by anyone. What do you think? Is Noma right that science and religion ask different questions? Is my alternative right that they investigate the same reality from different angles? Or is there a third option I have not considered? Tell me in the comments. This is not rhetorical. I am genuinely uncertain about the right framework, and the best framework might be one that a viewer of this video articulates better than I can. Here is what I want you to take from this part. 5 observations, each uncomfortable for a different audience. First, the science versus religion debate is not about data, it is about epistemology, about what counts as knowledge, about what counts as evidence, about what counts as real. The scientist and the believer look at the same universe and reach different conclusions, not because they see different things, but because they have different criteria for what counts as seeing. Until the epistemological question is addressed explicitly and honestly, and with full recognition that both sides have epistemological commitments that are not self-evident, the debate will continue to go in circles forever. Both sides talking past each other, both sides certain they are right, both sides unable to hear the other, because they are using the same words to mean different things and neither side notices. Second, scientism is self-refuting and further undermined by Gödel's incompleteness theorems. The claim that science is the only valid form of knowledge is not a scientific claim. It is a philosophical claim, and it cannot be justified by the very method it claims is the only valid method. And even mathematics, the foundation of science, has provable limits on what it can demonstrate. Reject scientism without rejecting science. Science is magnificent, the greatest epistemic achievement of human civilization, the source of everything from antibiotics to spaceflight. But the claim that science is the only path to truth is incoherent, and defending it requires a kind of intellectual dishonesty that science itself would not tolerate. Third, religious epistemology has genuine problems that must be acknowledged honestly. The diversity of mystical reports across traditions is a real challenge to the claim that mystical experience produces reliable knowledge about the specific nature of the divine. The interpretive disagreements between traditions are deep and in some cases irreconcilable. But this challenge is weakened considerably by the observation that the same epistemological structure exists in science. Quantum mechanics produces the same experimental results across every laboratory in the world, and physicists disagree fundamentally about what the results mean. If interpretive disagreement invalidates mystical knowledge, it invalidates quantum mechanical knowledge too. The standard must be applied consistently, or it reveals bias. Fourth, NOMA is incomplete, and the evidence from modern physics proves it. The magisteria overlap. The physics of the last century directly addresses questions about consciousness, design, information, survival, and the fundamental nature of reality that were traditionally the exclusive domain of religion. The diplomatic separation of science and religion into non-overlapping domains was a useful fiction in the 20th century that the 21st century evidence has rendered untenable. Reality does not respect jurisdictional boundaries. The truth about consciousness is simultaneously a neuroscience question and a theology question. The truth about fine-tuning is simultaneously a cosmology question and a design question. Pretending these are separate questions that belong to separate disciplines distorts both disciplines. Fifth, the investigation is not complete on either side. 95% of the universe is made of substances we have not identified. The measurement problem is unsolved. The hard problem is unsolved. Quantum gravity is unsolved. The origin of consciousness is unknown. The reason for fine-tuning is unknown. Theology continues to develop, and mystical phenomenology continues to be studied with increasing rigor. Declaring a winner at this stage of the investigation is not only premature, it is dishonest. The honest position is uncertainty, combined with investigation. The honest position is following the evidence wherever it leads, with the courage to change your mind when the evidence demands it. What do you think? Is Noma right that science and religion ask entirely different questions? Is convergent investigation right that they investigate the same reality from different angles? Or is there a third option that I have not considered that better captures the relationship? I am genuinely asking. This is not performative humility. I'm uncertain. And the best framework for understanding the relationship between science and religion might be one that a viewer of this video articulates more clearly than I can. Tell me in the comments. The most thoughtful responses will be discussed in Part 4. In Part 4, we bring everything together. The genuine conflicts from Part 1, the stunning convergences from Part 2, the philosophical framework from Part 3, and we ask the final question. Given everything we have examined over 15,000 words of physics, philosophy, theology, and honest uncertainty, what is the most intellectually responsible relationship between science and religion that a thoughtful person can hold? Not the most comfortable relationship, not the one that confirms what you already believe, not the one that makes you feel vindicated, the most honest one, the one that takes all the evidence seriously, the conflicts and the convergences, the physics and the philosophy, the data and the experience, the hard problem and the fine-tuning and the measurement problem and evolution and the age of the earth and consciousness and unitarity and the 4,000 years of contemplative report from every continent. What does it all add up to? And what should you do with the answer? That is Part 4. The conclusion. The answer will not be what either side expects, because the evidence does not support what either side wants to hear. And the only honest response to evidence that contradicts your expectations is to update your expectations, not the evidence. We have covered a lot of ground in this series, 15,000 words across 3 parts: history, physics, philosophy, Galileo, and Darwin, and the Big Bang. The measurement problem and quantum entanglement and the fine-tuning of 26 fundamental constants, epistemology and scientism, and Gödel's incompleteness, and the problem of religious diversity, and the identical structure of interpretive disagreement in quantum mechanics and mystical traditions. We examine genuine conflicts between science and religion. We examine genuine convergences. We examine the philosophical foundations that determine which evidence counts and which gets dismissed before it is even considered. Now it is time for the final question. The question this entire series has been building toward. The question that every viewer has been waiting for, whether they admit it or not. Does science and religion conflict? And the honest answer. The answer that takes all the evidence seriously. The answer that does not cherry-pick for either side. The answer that follows the data wherever it leads, even when the destination is uncomfortable for everyone. The honest answer is this. It depends on what you mean by religion. This is not evasion, this is precision. Because the word religion covers at least 3 fundamentally different kinds of claims, and science has a different relationship with each kind. Collapsing all 3 into one word and asking, does science conflict with religion, is like asking, is water good for you? Good for drinking, yes. Good for breathing, no. The question is too coarse. It needs to be split into finer questions. And when you split it, the answer becomes clear. The first kind of religious claim is empirical claims about the physical world. The Earth is 6,000 years old. Species were created individually in their current form. The Earth is the center of the universe. The Sun orbits the Earth. A global flood covered all the mountains 4,000 years ago. These are claims about the physical world. They are testable, they have been tested, and they are wrong. The Earth is 4.54 billion years old. This is established by radiometric dating using multiple independent decay chains: uranium, lead, potassium, argon, rubidium, strontium, that all converge on the same age. Species evolved from common ancestors through natural selection over billions of years. This is established by the fossil record, by comparative genomics, by molecular clocks, by direct observation of evolution in laboratory populations. The Earth orbits the Sunday. This is established by stellar parallax, by the Doppler effect, by the aberration of starlight, by the phases of Venus. There was no global flood that covered all mountains. The geological evidence is unambiguous. No flood deposit, no disruption of the stratigraphic record, no genetic bottleneck, consistent with a population of 8 humans 4,000 years ago. These conflicts are real, genuine, irresolvable. Science has proven specific empirical claims of certain religious traditions to be false. If your religion requires you to believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old, then yes, science conflicts with your religion. And science is right. The evidence is overwhelming. Denying radiometric dating or evolution or heliocentrism in the 21st century is not faith. It is denial, and there is a difference. Faith is trust in what cannot be proven. Denial is rejection of what has been proven. Faith is noble, denial is not. But notice something critical. These empirical claims are not the core of any major religious tradition. They are peripheral claims, contextual claims. Claims that reflect the cosmological understanding of the era in which the texts were written, not the spiritual message the texts were written to convey. The Quran's message is not that the earth is flat. The Quran's message is that God is one, that God created the universe, that humans are accountable, and that the purpose of life is worship and moral action. Genesis's message is not that creation took 6 literal days. Genesis's message is that creation was intentional, that the world is good, that humans have a special role, and that the relationship between creator and creation is one of purpose and care. The Vedas' message is not about the specific mechanisms of cosmic creation. The Vedas' message is about the nature of Brahman, the relationship between Atman and Brahman, and the path to liberation from suffering. When science refutes the peripheral empirical claims, it does not touch the core spiritual claims. The core claims are not about the age of rocks or the mechanism of speciation or the geometry of the solar system. The core claims are about the nature of reality, the purpose of existence, the ground of being, and the relationship between consciousness and the divine. And these core claims are precisely the claims that modern physics has made more interesting, not less. The second kind of religious claim is metaphysical claims about the nature of reality. God exists. Consciousness is fundamental. The universe was created intentionally. The soul survives death. Reality has purpose and meaning. These are not empirical claims in the ordinary sense. You cannot measure God with a detector. You cannot weigh the soul on a scale. You cannot test purpose in a laboratory. These claims are about the deep structure of reality, about what exists beyond the reach of current scientific instruments, about the nature of the foundation. And here is where the relationship between science and religion becomes genuinely complex. Because the physics we examined in Part 2 does not confirm these metaphysical claims, but it does something almost as remarkable. It makes them more plausible than they were before the physics was discovered. Not proven, more plausible. There is a difference, and the difference matters enormously. Before quantum mechanics, the materialist worldview was simple and clean. The universe is matter in motion, governed by deterministic laws. Consciousness is what the brain does, the way digestion is what the stomach does. There is no soul. There is no purpose. There is no design. Everything is particles bouncing off particles, following Newton's laws in a clockwork universe. God is unnecessary. The universe is a machine. Consciousness is a byproduct. Meaning is a human invention projected onto a meaningless cosmos. This was the confident worldview of 19th century materialism. Laplace, Helmholtz, Huxley, and it was reasonable given the physics available. Classical mechanics, deterministic, local, reductive, materialistic, no room for mystery, no room for consciousness as anything special, no room for God. Then, the 20th century happened, and the clean, simple materialist picture shattered. Not in one blow, in 5. Each independent, each confirmed, each devastating to the materialist worldview in a different way. Quantum mechanics showed that the observer cannot be removed from the description of physical reality, that the act of measurement changes what is measured in ways that cannot be explained by disturbance or clumsiness, that the universe, at its most fundamental level, is not deterministic but probabilistic, that particles do not have definite properties until observed, that a single electron passes through 2 slits simultaneously until you look at which slit it passes through, that the mathematical formalism of quantum mechanics, the most precisely tested theory in the history of science, treats the observer not as a passive recorder, but as an active participant in the determination of physical reality. After 100 years, the role of consciousness in quantum mechanics remains an open question. Not because physicists have not tried to close it, because every attempt to close it, Copenhagen, many worlds, decoherence, pilot wave cubism, generates new questions that are equally hard. The measurement problem is not a historical curiosity. It is a living wound at the heart of physics, and consciousness remains the one concept that every proposed solution must either invoke or explicitly exclude. Either way, consciousness is at the center of the debate, which is exactly where every religious tradition places it. Quantum entanglement showed that the universe is non-local, that separated particles remain correlated in ways that no local mechanism can explain, that what happens to one entangled particle instantaneously determines the state of its partner, regardless of the distance between them. John Bell proved the theorem in 1964. Alain Aspect confirmed it experimentally in 1982. Anton Zeilinger extended it across distances of over 1,000 kilometers using the Mykios satellite in 2017. The Nobel Prize was awarded in 2022. The non-locality is not debatable. The universe is connected at a level deeper than space. And the Sufi and the Hindu and the Buddhist who said that separation is illusion, that all things are one, that every point contains, every other point were describing in the language of experience what entanglement describes in the language of tensor products and Bell inequalities. Fine-tuning showed that the constants of nature are calibrated for the existence of complexity and life with a precision that staggers the imagination. The strong force coupling constant, the electromagnetic coupling constant, the ratio of gravity to electromagnetism, the masses of the quarks and leptons, the cosmological constant, fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 122, the initial entropy of the Big Bang with a probability calculated by Roger Penrose at 1 in 10 to the 10 to the 123, 26 free parameters in the standard model, not one of which is predicted by the theory, all of which must fall within narrow ranges for the universe to produce anything more complex than hydrogen gas. The only scientific alternatives to intentional calibration are supersymmetry, which the LHC has searched for over a decade without finding, and the multiverse, which posits 10 to the 500 unobservable universes to explain the fine-tuning we observe. The multiverse might be real, but it is exactly as unfalsifiable as God, and accepting it requires exactly as much faith. The hard problem of consciousness showed that subjective experience resists every attempt at reductive explanation. David Chalmers formulated it in 1995. The problem is simple to state and apparently impossible to solve. Why does information processing in the brain produce inner experience? Why does it feel like something to see red, or taste chocolate, or hear thunder? A computer can process the same information without any inner experience. What is it about biological neural networks that produces the inner light of consciousness? After 30 years, the answer is we do not know. We do not even know what kind of answer would work. The leading proposals, panpsychism, integrated information theory, neutral monism, quantum consciousness, all either introduce consciousness as fundamental or acknowledge that it cannot be derived from physics alone. The hard problem has not gotten easier with more neuroscience. It has gotten harder. Every new discovery about neural correlates makes the gap between the correlates and the experience more vivid, not less. We know more about which neurons fire when you see red. We know nothing more about why that firing produces the experience of redness. Unitarity showed that quantum information is conserved through every physical transformation. The Schrödinger equation is unitary. This is a mathematical theorem, not a conjecture. Information cannot be created or destroyed in quantum mechanics. It can be transformed, scrambled, delocalized, spread across the environment, but it cannot be eliminated. If consciousness is quantum information, and the Penrose-Hameroff-Ortshaw model proposes exactly this, then the information constituting consciousness is conserved through the death of the brain, not destroyed, transformed, delocalized, but conserved. By the most fundamental law of the most successful theory in physics. This does not prove the soul survives death, but it proves that the information does. If consciousness is that information, each of these discoveries independently weakens the materialist position. Together they constitute the most significant shift in the intellectual landscape of the science and religion debate since the scientific revolution. Not a shift toward proof of God, a shift away from confident denial of God. The physics has not proven the theist right, but it has proven the confident materialist wrong. The confident claim that science has shown there is no God, that science has eliminated the need for anything beyond matter, that science has demonstrated the universe is purposeless and consciousness is just neurons and the soul is a fiction and fine-tuning is coincidence. None of these claims survive contact with 21st century physics, not because the physics points definitively to God, because the physics has revealed a universe far more strange, far more deep, far more resistant to reductive materialist explanation than any 19th century thinker imagined possible. The third kind of religious claim is experiential claims about direct knowledge of the divine. The mystic says, I have experienced God directly. The contemplative says, I have touched the ground of being in silence. The meditator says, I have seen through the illusion of the separate self and witnessed the interconnectedness of all things. The practitioner says, I know with a certainty that exceeds any intellectual argument that there is a reality beyond what the senses report and the instruments measure. Science cannot evaluate these claims directly. They are first-person reports of subjective experience. Science deals in third-person objective measurements. The epistemological gap between the two is real and might be permanent. But this gap does not mean the experiences are false. It means science is the wrong tool for evaluating them. A ruler cannot measure temperature. This does not mean temperature is unreal. It means rulers measure length, not heat. And the empirical study of contemplative experience over the last 3 decades has produced results that resist easy dismissal. Long-term meditators show measurable changes in brain structure and function. Thickened prefrontal cortex, increased grey matter in the insula and hippocampus, reduced activity in the default mode network, the brain region most associated with the narrative self. Andrew Newberg's neuroimaging of practitioners in deep prayer and meditation shows specific patterns of neural activity that are consistent across traditions. Franciscan nuns and Buddhist monks and Sufi practitioners show similar neural signatures during peak contemplative states. The brain is doing something specific and reproducible during these experiences. What it is doing, and whether the experiences correspond to an external reality or are generated internally, is a question neuroscience cannot currently answer, and might never answer, because the question requires access to the subjective content of the experience, not just the objective neural correlate. and science measures, correlates, not contents. So, the final accounting, after 4 parts, after 20,000 words, after history and physics and philosophy and theology, after Galileo and Darwin and the double-slit experiment and Bell's theorem and the cosmological constant and Gödel and Kant and the Sufis and the Buddhists and the neuroscientists, after all of it, here is the accounting. On the peripheral empirical claims science and religion conflict. Genuinely, irreconcilably, science wins, and religion must concede. Not reluctantly, but gratefully. Because truth is truth, regardless of its source, and an honest faith is strengthened, not weakened, by accepting correction. A faith that depends on the earth being 6,000 years old is a faith built on sand. A faith that depends on the nature of reality, on the ground of being, on the meaning of consciousness, on the purpose of existence, is a faith built on bedrock that no radiometric dating can erode. The Islamic tradition says seek knowledge even unto China. The pursuit of truth, wherever it leads, however uncomfortable, however challenging to inherited assumptions, is a religious value, not a threat to religion. A core value. And when the truth says the earth is 4 billion years old, the honest believer says, Alhamdulillah, the universe is even more magnificent than I imagined. My faith does not depend on the age of rocks. My faith depends on why there are rocks at all, why there is something rather than nothing, why the something is structured by an invisible field, fine-tuned to 34 decimal places, why the structure produces conscious beings who can discover the field and weep in the front row when they find it. That faith is not threatened by science. That faith is deepened by science. On the core metaphysical claims, science and religion do not conflict. They converge, not perfectly, not on every detail, not in ways that constitute proof, but structurally, point by point, domain by domain. The measurement problem is consistent with consciousness as fundamental to the operation of reality at the quantum level. Entanglement is consistent with the universal interconnectedness that every mystical tradition describes. Fine-tuning is consistent with intentional calibration by an intelligence that transcends the physical. The hard problem is consistent with consciousness being irreducible to physical processes. Unitarity is consistent with the conservation of the information that might constitute consciousness through physical death. 5 independent domains of confirmed physics. 5 core claims made independently by multiple religious traditions across 4 millennia. 5 structural consistencies between what physics measures and what contemplatives report. This is not proof. I say it one final time because the distinction between consistency and proof is the most important distinction in this entire series. Consistency means the data is compatible with the claim. It does not mean the data requires the claim. The data is also compatible with other explanations. Decoherence instead of consciousness. Coincidence instead of interconnectedness. The multiverse instead of design. Future neuroscience instead of irreducibility. Non-conscious information instead of a soul. Every convergence has an alternative explanation. Every door has another exit. But the pattern of convergences across 5 independent domains, all pointing in the same direction, all consistent with the same family of claims, all discovered by a methodology that was not designed to find them and did not expect to find them, is not something that can be dismissed with the wave of a hand. Patterns demand explanation, and the pattern here is that the deepest investigations of the physical world keep arriving at structures that match what the deepest investigations of the contemplative world reported centuries or millennia earlier. On the experiential claims, science is not equipped to judge, and this is not a weakness of science, it is a recognition of scope. These claims exist in a domain that the scientific method was not designed to access, The mystic reports an experience of unity with the ground of being. The neuroscientist can measure that during this experience, the default mode network shows reduced activity, the prefrontal cortex shows altered patterns, and the sense of self dissolves. But the neuroscientist cannot determine whether the experience corresponds to an external reality or is generated entirely by the brain, because determining that would require access to the subjective content of the experience, not just the objective neural correlate. And science measures correlates, not contents. Science can tell you which neurons fire when you fall in love. Science cannot tell you what love feels like from the inside. Both pieces of information are real. Both are important. Neither is complete without the other. Andrew Newberg's neuroimaging work at Thomas Jefferson University has shown something remarkable. Franciscan nuns in deep contemplative prayer and Tibetan Buddhist monks in deep meditation show similar patterns of decreased parietal lobe activity, the region that constructs the boundary between self and world. When this region quiets, the boundary dissolves, the self expands, the sense of separation between the experiencer and the experience disappears. The experience is reported as more real than ordinary waking consciousness, not less. As a revelation, not a hallucination. As seeing through a veil, not constructing a fantasy. Is the veil being removed, revealing a deeper reality? Or is the brain constructing an experience of a deeper reality that does not actually exist? This is the question neuroscience cannot answer, and might never answer, because answering it requires knowing what is behind the veil independently of the brain's report, and every method of knowing passes through the brain. We cannot step outside our own cognitive apparatus and check whether its reports match an external reality. We are inside the system. And from inside the system, the question of whether the system accurately reports what is outside the system might be permanently undecidable. This is Kant's noumenon again. The thing in itself forever beyond the reach of the faculties we use to know anything at all. The appropriate response to this situation is not dismissal. It is not the assertion that because science cannot verify the experiences are meaningless. That assertion is scientism. And scientism, as we showed in Part 3, is self-refuting. The appropriate response is epistemic humility, the recognition that there might be genuine knowledge that is accessed through methods other than the scientific method, the recognition that the contemplative traditions which have been refining introspective techniques for 4,000 years might have developed instruments for investigating consciousness that are as sophisticated in their domain as the Large Hadron Collider is in its domain. Different instruments, different domains, different kinds of knowledge, but knowledge nonetheless. I want to tell you where I stand. Not because my position should determine yours, but because after 4 parts of presenting every side as fairly as I can, I owe you the honesty of stating my own conclusions, and because asking you to share your views while concealing mine would be intellectual cowardice. I believe the universe is more than matter in motion. I believe this not because I was raised in a particular tradition, although I was, not because I find the idea emotionally comforting, although sometimes I do. I believe this because the physics leads there. Every major discovery of the last century points away from simple materialism and toward a universe that is deeper, stranger, more interconnected, and more consciousness-friendly than the materialist picture allows. The measurement problem, the non-locality, the fine-tuning, the hard problem, the information conservation. 5 independent lines of evidence all pointing in the same direction, away from a universe that is fundamentally dead, mechanical, purposeless, toward a universe that is fundamentally alive, interconnected, structured. I believe that something lies at the foundation of reality, something invisible, something omnipresent, something that gives structure to what would otherwise be formless. Whether that something is the God of Abraham, or the Brahman of the Upanishads, or the Dharmakaya of Mahayana Buddhism, or the Tao that cannot be named, or the quantum vacuum of physics, or something entirely beyond what any tradition has yet articulated, I cannot say with certainty. The evidence does not resolve between these descriptions, but the evidence does resolve one thing. The foundation is not nothing. The universe is not an accident happening in a void. There is something at the bottom, something that all the traditions point to from different angles with different words, something that the physics keeps rediscovering with different instruments. But I also believe that intellectual honesty requires me to say what I do not know, and what I do not know is enormous. I do not know whether consciousness is truly quantum information or whether the Orch-Orr model is correct. I do not know whether the multiverse exists and explains the fine-tuning. I do not know whether the hard problem will eventually yield to a neuroscience we have not yet developed. I do not know which religious tradition, if any, has the most accurate description of the foundation. I do not know whether mystical experiences access an external reality or are generated by the brain in a way that merely feels real. I do not know. And the honest response to not knowing is not to pretend you know. The honest response is to investigate, to keep asking, to hold your conclusions lightly, and to change your mind when the evidence demands it. I also believe that religion has much to answer for, that specific empirical claims have been falsified and must be abandoned honestly, that religious institutions have caused immense suffering through dogmatism, through intolerance, through the suppression of free inquiry, through violence committed in the name of God, that the diversity of religious experience remains a genuine philosophical puzzle, and that certainty, whether religious or atheistic, is the most dangerous intellectual position available to a human being. Because certainty closes the mind, and a closed mind cannot investigate, cannot update, cannot discover, cannot grow. The confident atheist and the dogmatic believer are making the same mistake from opposite directions. Both are certain. Both are wrong to be certain, because the evidence does not support certainty in either direction. The most honest position I can occupy is this: humble uncertainty combined with relentless investigation, the willingness to follow evidence wherever it leads, the courage to hold conclusions lightly and change them when the evidence demands it, the humility to say I do not know while continuing to ask, and the conviction that asking is more important than answering. Because the question, what is the nature of reality, is bigger than any answer currently available, bigger than the standard model, bigger than any theology, bigger than any philosophy. And the appropriate response to a question bigger than your answer is not to pretend your answer is big enough. It is to keep looking. Here is the final thing I know, the only thing I know with certainty, after 20,000 words and 4 parts, and months of research and a lifetime of thinking about this question. The universe is deeper than we have described, deeper than physics has reached with the standard model and its 26 unexplained parameters and its unsolved measurement problem and its missing quantum gravity and its 95% dark sector. Deeper than religion has mapped with its competing theologies and its interpretive disagreements and its 4,000 years of accumulated wisdom that still has not produced consensus on the nature of the divine. Deeper than philosophy has articulated, with its epistemological frameworks and its logical analyses and its centuries of debate that have narrowed the question without answering it. The depth is real, and the honest response to depth that exceeds your comprehension is not to pretend you comprehend it, not to build a fortress of certainty on a foundation of insufficient evidence, not to pick a team and defend it against all challenges regardless of what the data shows. The honest response is wonder, genuine wonder, the kind of wonder that does not demand an answer, the kind that sits with the question and lets the question do its work on you. The kind that Albert Einstein described when he said the most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious. It is the fundamental emotion which stands at the cradle of true art and true science. He who does not know it and can no longer wonder, no longer feel amazement, is as good as dead a snuffed-out candle. The mystery is real. The physics confirms it with equations that describe a universe stranger than fiction. The traditions describe it with narratives and practices refined over millennia. The contemplatives report it from the silence of their cells and caves and meditation halls. And the honest response to the mystery is not to explain it away with confident materialism, claiming that everything reduces to particles and the rest is sentiment. Not to claim certainty through dogmatic faith, insisting that one tradition has captured the complete truth and all others are in error. The honest response is investigation. Ongoing, humble, rigorous, fearless investigation. Using every tool, the equations and the silence, the detectors and the meditation cushion, the peer-reviewed journal and the contemplative report, the telescope and the prayer. Every tool. Because reality is deeper than any single tool can reach, and the human adventure of investigating that reality is far from over. The question, does science and religion conflict, has been answered. Yes, on the periphery where specific traditions make testable claims about the physical world and those claims fail the tests. No, at the core where the deepest physics and the deepest contemplation converge on structural descriptions of reality that neither expected to share. And the deeper question, the one beneath the question that started this series, what is the nature of the reality that both science and religion are investigating, remains gloriously, terrifyingly, beautifully open for all of us. The comments are open. Tell me your answer. Not the answer you think you should give, not the one that will get the most likes, not the one your tribe expects. Your actual answer. The one you arrive at alone with the evidence at 3 a.m. when nobody is watching and you do not have to perform for anyone. When you are just a conscious being sitting in a universe you did not create, wondering why you are here and what all of this means. That answer is the only one that matters, because that answer is yours. I will be reading, I will be learning, I will be updating my own views based on the best arguments I encounter, because I am still investigating too. We all are, and that is the most honest thing any of us can say.